My talk is the myth of corporate efficiency, and what makes that important is that our whole political spectrum is based on the notion that large corporations are more efficient and therefore dominate the market because of that efficiency. And they are efficient up to a certain point, and beyond that point, they are less efficient. And they're also efficient in different ways and inefficient in different ways. So the left, the Marxist left, the far left, is predicated on corporate efficiency. Because what is a communist government except one giant corporation? That's essentially what it is. And if big business can do things more efficiently than small business, then government is the ultimate big business, and it should be able to do things more efficiently than that. And then the libertarian and conservative thing is, well, if big business is more efficient than small business, why are you complaining that the big business is profitable? It's profitable because it's more efficient. And therefore we should should submit to the idea that big businesses will eventually take over because they're more efficient. And my thing is, what if they're not more efficient? What if the whole political spectrum is predicated on this false notion of efficiency? So the question is, what are they efficient at and what are they inefficient at? I only go into this because the whole economics profession has obliterated this, and it was the only clear-thinking economics that ever existed, which was that there's three factors of production. There's land, labor, and capital, and these were very tightly defined. So land was everything that's here, everything that exists without a human being having created it. So the broadcast spectrum is land. The synchronous orbit of the satellites is land. The satellites themselves are capital, but the unique location in the orbit is land. The spectrum that your cell phones use is land. The oil in the ground is land. The oil taken out of the ground is no longer land because it's been worked by human labor, but in the ground it is land. Just about everything is land. And when people say, well, you can create land, you can fill in the ocean and create a little isthmus of land, you haven't really created land, you've changed the name, you've improved the land, because the land was underwater, and now the land is above water, and that's a big improvement. But the concept of land is an important distinction, because people will say, there will be somebody who owns a high-rise apartment building, and that apartment building, he owns the land in the building. Well, 90% of the value is in the building, and he paid labor to build that building, or he bought it from somebody who paid labor to build that building. So that building is capital, and only the land underneath it is land. So he's 90% capitalist. We call him a landlord. And U.S. Steel, most of what they own is iron ore, coal. They're like the second biggest landowner in Appalachia. In Birmingham, Alabama, they own, or not Birmingham. Yeah, it is Birmingham. They own 200 square miles around Birmingham. So you cannot drive out of Birmingham without driving past U.S. Steel land. So when you get into the question of what is land and what is capital, we have a habit of referring to U.S. Steel as a capitalist when they're mostly a landlord in that economic sense. And we talk about landlords who are mostly capitalists in an economic sense. And so it's an important thing to separate. And the other, before I get into the interesting stuff, the other aspect of it is that when Marx attacked capitalism, he treated land and money as capital. So this nice distinction between land, labor, and capital is obliterated by Marx. Well, when the anti-Marxists, including a lot of the libertarians, when they defend capital, they defend land as if it was capital. So Marx attacked capital as if it were land. The libertarian right or the anti-Marxists defend land as if it were capital. And that just creates a lot of confusion because everybody ends up talking past each other. And so I wanted to go, the classical liberals, these are 10 of them, they would tax land. Some of them would tax nothing but land. And Tom Paine said every citizen should be given a share of the land rent. There's a motion for basic income now, and a big faction of the basic income advocates say it should come from land rent because land rent is unearned income in the first place. John Stuart Mill, at the bottom left, coined the term unearned increment. And he said any profit you make from production is earned profit, but the profit you make when the land is up in value is your unearned increment. So it's unearned no matter who gets it. So if it's shared on a per capita basis, you haven't taken from somebody's earnings to give it to somebody who hasn't earned it. So the land issue is really important. And coming back to corporate efficiency, corporations are very labor efficient, and they are not at all land efficient. This is basically the difference between property tax and land value tax. So at the top you see property tax. The way property tax works is they tax your land and your building both. So if you keep up your building, you have a high tax. And if your building is suitable to the land, you have a high tax. But if your building is run down or you have a vacant lot, you have a low tax. So the main difference when I talk about land tax, if you think of it as being like property tax, except the building is exempt. So the rate would be higher because you're only taxing the land. So corporations are very labor efficient. A corporation has a big tractor, he can plow thousands of acres, one guy. And there's probably one other guy who works on the tractor, and probably at harvest season they hire 9 or 10 guys to do this. But basically, corporations are hugely labor efficient. They are not at all land efficient. For one thing, that tractor smashes down a whole bunch of the land, so there's rows of land that you don't really get. The other is when you automate everything to reduce labor, you end up doing things by machine that loses the crop. American tomatoes are mostly machine picked. And the machine comes through and picks them all. It just picks them all at once. So some of them are not ready and have to be thrown away. Some of them are green and they can be salvaged for ketchup, but they're not really good. Some of them are ready to package and sell in the stores, and some of them are just rotten and get thrown away as well. So you've got to pick that time, but it's real cheap. And it's real cheap because it's labor efficient, but it's not land efficient. Well, land is not a big cost if it's not taxed heavily. But labor is a big cost because you not only have to pay the laborer, but you have to pay the laborer's Social Security, and you have to pay the laborer's unemployment compensation, and you have to pay taxes on it's not like it's workman's compensation. You have to have insurance for that labor. All this stuff is paid, is part of what's called the tax wedge between what the laborer actually gets and what you had to put out in order to employ him. So we make the laborer artificially expensive by putting most of the taxes on labor. And additionally, what the laborer is interested in is his spending power, and if there's a sales tax, his spending power is reduced as well by the sales tax. So that's all part of that tax wedge on labor. And without reducing taxes a dime, if you shift those taxes onto land value, what happens is it makes it more expensive to use this strategy and less expensive to have smaller tractors and to have your tomatoes picked by hand. You know, the more taxes are on land, the more important it becomes to be land efficient, and the less important it is to be labor efficient. And that means you hire jobs, you get more jobs. Labor is the only natural resource that is wasted when it is not used. And by not used, I mean, you're not wasting labor if you can reduce people's working days to 30 hours a week and people get long vacations. I mean, there's places in France and people have an average of 10 weeks of vacation a year. And that's not wasting labor because those people are enjoying their lives for those 10 weeks. But when you have people who are chronically unemployed or are sitting on the front step wishing, you know, wondering what they're going to do between welfare checks, that labor, that human being is wasted. His talent is wasted, his drive to accomplish something is wasted, everything is wasted. So we say, why would you tax labor when you're causing labor, when you're damaging labor by taxing it? Why wouldn't you tax the energy that is in short supply? So if you tax the value of land, people will try to do more with less land. If you put a surtax on coal and oil and gold and silver and stuff, they will extract that out of the ground slower and they'll burn the coal and oil slower. If you are concerned about pollution, a CO2 tax makes more sense than energy subsidies. So we subsidize windmills and the money goes to corporations. The biggest contributor to the global warming alarm 15 years, 20 years ago, I forget how many years ago, was Enron. And they were also the biggest builder of government-subsidized wind turbines. And they went bankrupt because they were trading on pollution tax credits. And when we had an economic downturn, nobody wanted to pollute as much because they weren't producing as much, and the pollution tax credit market bottomed out, and Enron collapsed. And all their energy contracts were bought up by General Electric. And now one of the biggest promoters of the global warming alarmism camp is General Electric. Well, that doesn't mean global warming is wrong. It just means there's corporate people with an agenda who are in it, and their agenda is not just to promote the idea of global warming, but it's to promote the idea of subsidies. If we had a serious energy tax, if we had a carbon emissions tax that you paid when you pulled the coal out and said, we're going to burn this coal, we said, we know how much carbon it's going to produce, so we tax it right down there. That would make us want to use that energy much more efficiently. And since there's no tax like that on wind turbines, then Enron or General Electric or Lincoln Electric or anybody who's capable of building wind turbines would find it profitable to do so without having to seek subsidies. But one of the things that big corporations are really good at is subsidy sucking. So if we had a free market building wind turbines, it's quite possible that a smaller company would build those wind turbines more efficiently than Enron or GE would. But a small company can't hire the lobbyists to go to Congress and say, you need to subsidize wind energy and you need to write this wind turbine proposals, and here's how it should be written. And they end up getting a wind turbine proposal that benefits GE. So I'm a lukewarmer. I'm one of those people who think, yeah, it's been getting warmer, and there's some good things about that, and there's some bad things about that. Canadian crop yields are way up. there's some islands that are sinking. So it's, I don't have a problem with doing something that reduces our carbon emissions if it doesn't enrich the Enrons of the world at the expense of ordinary people. I'm all for shifting the taxes off of human labor and putting it on carbon emission. And if people say that's not going to do it enough, then I say, well, then you didn't shift it far enough. At some point, carbon emission becomes so expensive that we get what we can have, what we can tolerate. And I'll let the deniers and the alarmists argue about what that point is, but there is no economic downside to taxing carbon and untaxing something else, like human beings. They say, well, it'll kill jobs. The tax that kills jobs, more than any other tax, is a tax on jobs, right? It's a payroll tax. No, nothing kills jobs like a payroll tax. So, so this whole thing about job killing, one of the things that the corporations are good at is promoting their agenda. So if you want to tax coal, well, that will destroy coal, that will destroy jobs. Well, not if you untax jobs. So that, or if you collect the money from the coal tax and you let the people in Pocahontas County, West Virginia, let those people get a per capita share of the taxes you levied on the coal companies in Pocahontas County, then the people of that county are getting the benefit from that tax that they would have been getting from the faster coal mining. So there's ways to isolate the corporations, but it's hard to get that message out because corporations have a bigger magnifier. This is Google Earth looking down on western Kansas. Those are what's called crop circles. They weren't created by aliens. They were created by farmers. It's irrigation. They plug a well in the center of that circle, and then they have a thing on wheels that just very slowly goes around the whole circle. And that thing is automated. It runs like a clock, and over a few days, it does the entire circle and starts over, and nobody's working there. It's just irrigating all by itself. That is hugely labor efficient. All that land that's inside the square but outside the crop circle is not being farmed at all. So there's additional waste that way. Big corporate farming is horribly inefficient. Plus, big corporate farming specializes in all the things we shouldn't eat. They grow corn, they grow wheat, they grow soy, they feed it to cattle, they feed it to us, and we end up looking like cattle. And they are competing with smaller farms. Now, the big farms, the bigger farmers get far less yield per dollar value of land. That's different from yield per acre, because the big corporate farmers can afford to buy the best land. And they have to buy the best land because it takes more intelligence to farm the poorer land, the hillier, rockier, rugged land. It takes real skill to farm. It doesn't take much skill to farm that. The groups that are fed up with globalist corporate power will say, well, a corporation has no soul, a corporation has no conscience, a corporation has no intelligence. Corporations are run by managers. That's why large corporations have the same problem that communist government has, is that managers are trying to look good on paper. And the more levels of bureaucracy there are between the people on the line doing the work and the people, you have the person on the line doing the work, and then you have a plant manager, and then an area manager, and then a regional manager, and then a national manager, and then the actual top of the corporation. And the people at the top of the corporation are making decisions based on what has filtered up through that pyramid. And that makes for some very unintelligent management. But this is simple, they can manage that. This is an organic farm, and there are larger organic farms, but they are less land efficient than these ones. This is one of those owner-occupied, owner-operated farms that is effective because as an owner, you don't just do what you have to do so you can go home. You want it to be right because you don't get paid unless it's right. And the more right it is, the better you get paid. So small entrepreneurs are very keen on making it right. Now, one of the things about organic farms, there's a different crop in each little square. And one of the reasons for that is that pests will come into an area. There are tomato bugs that if they find hundreds of acres of tomatoes, they will just breed and multiply, and they will eat that 100 acres of tomatoes, which is why if you're going to have 100 acres of tomatoes, you have to use pesticides. Well, it's a lot more work to plant a little patch of tomatoes and then a little patch of garlic, and organic farmers put garlic everywhere because the bugs hate garlic because they have better sense than we have. But actually, garlic is healthy for us because our bugs hate garlic. But that is a huge amount of work, and not only are small family farms more land efficient and less labor efficient than big corporate farms, but organic farms are more land efficient and less labor efficient than petrochemical farms. Organic farms, some of them have raised beds. This one is an organic greenhouse, and they have what's called raised bed farming. You can't get a higher yield per acre. You can feed 10 people per acre with raised bed farming. It's a total pain in the neck because you have to build all these little beds and raise the dirt in them and reach in and plant. Everything is done by hand. I mean, what good would a tractor do you for this? When I was in high school in 1967, so it's half a century ago, the speech and debate, I was on the speech and debate team, and the topic was foreign aid. Should we give foreign aid to these other countries? And one of the examples was we wanted to help the people of India because India at that time was in the middle of a famine. And some bright person who undoubtedly had connections with International Harvester or John Deere or something said, we should give the Indian people tractors. Well, the Indian farmers loved the tractors, and it became very profitable. But the famine got worse because the tractor reduced the yield per acre. But they didn't have to hire the Indian peasants to help them farm anymore because the tractor would eliminate like 10 or 15 workers. So what we did by giving the Indian people tractors is we reduced their employment, so fewer people had jobs. We reduced their crop yields, so there was less food for them to fight over. And we increased their consumption of petroleum because they had to run the tractors. So this is that mentality of not separating land efficiency from labor efficiency led to this really bizarre result in India where we increased the severity of their famine through foreign aid. This is where people will say, okay, if you had a land value tax just in Ohio or just in Athens County, well, you get a lot more yield per dollar value of land if you put in a chicken factory or a pig factory. And the reason is you've crammed all these animals in such close quarters. And if you had a land value tax nationally, it would still cost them more because that guy with the giant tractor who was, farming 10,000 acres, He's raising grain that's going to be shipped to this pig factory. But if you want to do something locally about the pig factory, this is effluent from a pig factory. Every night they hose down the pigs and the pig pens, and it all goes out into this thing, which eventually finds its way into rivers and lakes. They try to dam this up so it is contained, and it's like they try to do sewage treatment on it, but it never works. Well, if you heavily charge them for polluting, then this kind of thing is impossible. So factory farming does not use a lot of land if you don't count the land where the grain is grown, but the grain's grown somewhere else. So as a local government, you can't do much about the inefficiency of the grain shipping. But you can do something about the pollution they cause. If the state will let you, you say, we have a right to charge whatever we think it's worth for the nuisance that you're causing. And we can define nuisance. I mean, even if there's no health risk, which there is, but even if I can't prove there's a health risk, my property value goes down if I'm downwind of your pig swamp. So I have a right to, or my government, local government, has a right to charge you the loss of value that other people are suffering because of your pig farm. And you shouldn't have to go to court for that, because it's not, it's basically everybody's land in the first place, and you should be, just like you should be paying rent for the land, you should pay rent for the water. If you're using the public's water as your garbage storage facility, or if you're using the public's air as your pollution storage facility, then we have a right to charge you for that, the same as we have a right to tax the value of the land. And that pretty much reduces it. But this is like the big exception in farming, is when you say that corporate farming is less land efficient. You can isolate this one section of corporate farming and make it look efficient. But it really isn't. The pollution is what you have to deal with, because none of these things can exist without polluting. Let's talk about retail. This is near Pittsburgh. The building further up, further north, is Sam's Club, and the building further south is Walmart. And way over to the east, that gray top building is a Lowe's Home Improvement Center. And they have to have a huge parking lot, partly because they have these big sales every so often, partly because you're in there for a long time. When you go to a Walmart, you're in there longer because it's all self-service, which means you say, where's the HDMI cable? I need to do a presentation. And they say, oh, electronics is back there. So you go back there and you walk around electronics for a while, and you say, find somebody in electronics if you're lucky, and say, where's the HDMI cables? And they say, oh, it's over there with the cables. And then you go walk over there with the cables, and you find somebody eventually who tells you where the cable, or you find it yourself. And you come back, and by the time you've done all that, you've been in there for, half an hour, and that parking space has to be tied up for half an hour. And if you're shopping for other things, it's all going to be like that. It's all going to be, unless you go there every week and buy your groceries there, it's all, then you know where your green peppers are, so you can go there. But this is very labor efficient because it's self-service. You, the customer, are doing the labor. And there's no tax on your labor because you're not getting a pay. They're not handing you cash. Your pay is that you get that HDMI cable for $1 or $2 less than you would have gotten it at a smaller computer store. The land inefficiency more than offsets that. If the taxes were on land instead of on labor, that would not be profitable. Not only are these places occupying a lot of land, but it's always land at the juncture of major intersections. And that juncture is extremely valuable land because multiple highways have been run to that area. If you're going to build all those highways to that area, there should be a whole town there. Why would you make all those highways converge and then you just have a bunch of big box stores when you could have an entire town at that location? And people would want to live there and have small businesses and neighborhoods there. If they're, you want to be out of earshot of the parkway, but you want to be able to get on it and get to where you need to go. I want to compare that to Donatelli's Food Center. There used to be little grocery stores, especially grocery stores like that, in every neighborhood in Pittsburgh, and probably every neighborhood in most cities. This one survived because it's got Italian specialty. But this place is very land efficient. Most of its customers walk there because it's a neighborhood business. The neighborhood is called Little Italy, so they get a lot of Italians shop there and don't have to travel far. The upstairs is apartments, so the land is used for that. You can bicycle there. A lot of people bicycle there. And I hate that bike lane, by the way, because it's right in the door zone. It's a completely off-topic thing, but the people who are putting bike lanes in dangerous places should be stopped from doing that. This picture was taken at a very slow time, and you can see in the very far right there's somebody behind the counter. Normally, when that store is busy, there's like 6 people behind that counter for the lunch rush. And the aisle, you have trouble getting back to where you are because there's people waiting for other things. So it's very land efficient to at some point it's too tight because it squeezes the customers, or if you have a problem with whatever the claustrophobia at the store, you don't want to go there during lunch rush. But this store is actually got better prices than the supermarkets on a lot of things. But you have to find out about them. But they don't have lots of advertisements, and they don't have lots of parking, and they don't have lots of the things that Walmart has. But they're very efficient in terms of land. And they keep more people employed, because there's probably 6 people working in that Donatelli's, and there's probably 12 people working in that Walmart. If you can't draw from a large area to justify the big parking lot, then you don't go there, because the government requires you to have a big parking lot. The chain stores draw from a large area, and people drive there, so they don't mind having the parking lots. The zoning laws help the chain stores have to manage their neighborhood businesses. But the other thing is, this Home Depot was built, there had been a Sears there, and Sears got a subsidy to locate there, and they went out of business. So they tore down the Sears, and Home Depot got a subsidy to build there. They got a 10-year tax abatement to build there. And I dug up all the phone books in the year 2000, and I looked up all the hardware stores, and I found all the hardware stores within a 2.5-mile radius of that Home Depot. There were 17 hardware stores. That was 2000 when they opened the doors, the first year of their 10-year tax abatement. In 2010, there were 0 hardware stores in that 2.5-mile radius. And it's the same thing. There's no way that those 17 hardware stores employ fewer people than that Home Depot. But we not only put most of our taxes on wages, we this is the upper end of Paul Lumber. This has been here forever. And if you click it again, you get the lower end of Paul Lumber. Paul Lumber has the lumber stacked way up high. And they get their lumber in smaller batches because they don't have a lot of space. And when you go to Paul Lumber, you go into a clerk and they write up your order and they hand it to one of their people. And you go out to the lumber bay, and instead of you getting the lumber because it's up high, they have one employee handing the lumber down to another employee who puts it on your truck for you. So, or in the back of your car for you, or whatever you have. So Paul Lumber, once again, is not labor efficient at all. They're very resource efficient. And they are within that 2.5 mile radius. If they weren't a hardware store, they were another lumber company. And I talked about Home Depot to the owner of that thing, and he said, this is what they did, essentially what they did. He said, we pay, in the suburbs, the mercantile tax is half what it is in the city. And the business privilege tax is a third of what it is in the city. And we pay those taxes, and we pay higher taxes than any lumber yard outside the city. He said, they might as well just send somebody twice a year to come in, empty our cash registers, take the money to Home Depot and give it to them. And it's essentially what these things do. It's called economic cannibalism because nobody's buying more lumber because there's a Home Depot. They're just buying it at Home Depot instead of buying it at Paul Lumber. And they've done this with grocers. I mean, you're not going to increase the amount of food people eat by subsidizing a grocery store, but they've actually done that. That's the inside of Paul Lumber, and you can't really see it, but there's big wooden lofts up there, and most of their lumber is up top. Plywood is down at the bottom because you don't want to hand plywood down, but all the boards are up top. Home Depot is cheaper for some things. You go to buy, so this is one of the things, corporations are more efficient at marketing. Home Depot has computer stores. They have special stores where the personnel, if somebody calls on the phone and wants to know the price of a 2x4 or the price of a sledgehammer or whatever, they enter that in the computer. And they say, these are the things that people call into price check. Let's make sure these things are real cheap. And the things that nobody calls in on, like molding, well, most people don't even know how to describe the molding. They have to go in there and they see the molding and they say, yeah, that matches the molding in my house. So nobody price checks molding. So molding at Paul Lumber that was 16 cents a foot was 26 cents a foot at Home Depot. And I called Home Depot once, I needed a sledgehammer. That's why I thought of sledgehammers. I needed a sledgehammer, and they said, wait a minute. And I sat on the phone for like 15 minutes. Somebody called back and said, sledgehammers are $18. That was a while ago. I'm sure they're more than $18 now. So I called Paul Lumber, and somebody answered right away. I didn't have to go through a phone tree. Somebody answered the phone and said, and I said, I need a sledgehammer. And he said, what weight do you need? Weight? He says there's 12 pound, 14 pound, and 16 pound, or something like that. And I said, I don't know. He says, what are you doing? He says, I have to drive this ground wire into the ground, or not ground, drive this giant stake into the ground, big metal rod into the ground, pound it into the ground so that you can ground your electrical to it. And he said, well, that's serious work, and most electricians use the 16 pound, whatever the heavy pound one was. But they use the real heavy one. But you don't know what you're doing, so you should buy the middle size. And so, okay, so I'm not only getting more labor from this guy, but I'm getting expertise that I would never get at Home Depot. And I went to that lumber yard, And there's these 3 or 4 people at the counter, and I say to the woman, where are your sledgehammers? And the guy who's further back in the counter says, are you the guy that called? I said, yeah, and he gets up and he takes me to the sledgehammer, and it was $14 instead of $18. So when you get down to when you get away from the loss leaders and the high volume items, the smaller corporation, the smaller businesses are often better priced, despite the fact that they're not labor efficient, and despite the fact that the taxes are stacked against them, and despite the fact that Home Depot's got a subsidy. All that, they're still more efficient, which means Home Depot has to be incredibly inefficient for them to not be able to compete dollar for dollar with that guy who's taking me by the hand and bringing me to my sledgehammer. So I generally don't have much of a belief in corporate efficiency at all. One of the things that they're efficient at is preventing competition from coming in. And I was in Fortune magazine, did a story on Pittsburgh's land tax, and the real estate editor of Fortune magazine came to Pittsburgh for 2 weeks and had me take him around, and he bought me dinner, and it was great. But one day he was talking about the steel industry, and he had done a story on the head of, I think it was Ryerson Steel, might have been Republic Steel. I know it started with an R. It was a small company, and small for steel mills. And he said to the president of Ryerson Steel, how do you manage to stay in business with such giants like U.S. Steel? And he said, every night when I go to bed, I get down on my hands and knees and thank God for the utter incompetence of U.S. Steel. But U.S. Steel owns most of the iron ore in the Mesabi Range in western Michigan. It owns much of the coal in Appalachia. And so no matter who makes the steel, you're bidding up the value of U.S. Steel's coal reserves. And if the Japanese are making the steel with coal from West Virginia, that's even if they don't buy their coal from U.S. Steel, they've taken away the coal from the coal market, so U.S. Steel's coal is more expensive for whoever buys it. So U.S. Steel wins because they're a landlord, not because they're a capitalist. And they renamed themselves USX for a while because they were sitting on all these empty steel mills and not the least bit interested in turning the land over or selling it. And they had Superfund pollution problems and stuff too. But we subsidized, J&L Steel was this big steel mill in Pittsburgh, and they went under in 1979. 1979. And the Urban Redevelopment Authority ended up subsidizing development on that plant. And J&L got $4 million for the vacant land, plus somebody else took care of the remediation costs, plus they sold, they had the world's largest steam engine in there, they sold that for several $1 million. But all these subsidies, again, big corporations are good at subsidy sucking. There's a movie called Walmart, The High Price of Low Taxes, or The High Cost of Low Taxes. And they show a bunch of things. One of them is a Walmart in, I think it's Alameda. It's a Walmart in California. And they got a sales tax, a 10-year sales tax abatement to locate a Walmart in this municipality, because California has local sales taxes. They curtailed their property tax, they tax everything now. And Walmart opened their store, got a tax break, so everybody from the surrounding area would shop at Walmart because they not only had good prices, but they had lower taxes, lower sales taxes. And they did that for 10 years, and their sales tax abatement ran out, and they went to the next municipality over, and they got an abatement from the next municipality over, and built a new Walmart 1.5 miles from the old Walmart. And then they refused to sell the old Walmart, because who's going to buy the old Walmart? A competitor of Walmart, right? So they just said, you know, our property taxes are so low on this Walmart, because California curtailed property taxes, that we can sit on this old Walmart in Alameda, and you can't give this abatement to the next guy, because there isn't going to be a next guy, because we own it. And meanwhile, we got an abatement in the next town over, and for the next 10 years, that municipality lost business to the next town over. And this is the kind of games that corporations play. You know, Kelo? There's a libertarians love this case because it's eminent domain against this woman had, her name was Mrs. Kelo. She had a house in, it's not Bridgeport, Connecticut, it's New London, Connecticut. And they came in to take her house for eminent domain. Well, they were taking her house to build this giant pharmaceutical plant for Pfizer Chemical. And they were giving Pfizer this huge subsidy. So we're spending a fortune on eminent domain to acquire the land, and then a fortune in lawsuits against this woman who held out, and she won, and it went to the Supreme Court and she won, but she had already lost the house. What she won was damages. And they built this giant pharmaceutical company. And Pfizer moved in, got their 10 years abatement, and moved out. And New London had this giant white elephant of a factory sitting up on a really prime location, and looked down over the sound. It was just gorgeous land to waste on a factory. So they gave Glaxo Pharmaceuticals a 10-year abatement to move in where Pfizer had moved out. And Glaxo stayed there for 10 years and moved out again. And so these people get paid, they get played. Governments get played because corporations are trying to look good at their stockholders, and as bad as stockholders are, they pay more attention than voters. So governments try to look good to voters, and corporations try to look good to stockholders, and they play this game, and the corporations win every time on these things. Amazon wants us to give huge amounts of money to building Amazon headquarters out there. This is what corporations are efficient at. So when you say corporate efficiency, you're talking about efficiency manipulating the government, and efficiency at throwing the tax burden off onto ordinary people. So the whole world believes that property tax is regressive. Well, what does regressive mean? It means poor people are paying it more than rich people are paying it. That's what regressive has come to mean. Well, are you saying poor people, poor people have all the property, and when we get the property away from poor people, then rich people will be paying the taxes because it's a tax on property? Poor people do own some property, and they pay taxes on it. But everywhere I looked, if you look at a person over their lifetime, they work for 10 years before 10 to 15 years on average, before they own a house. And then they work and they own a house. And then for 10 or 15 years, they own a house and they're not working anymore. And when you figure out all that works, in Pittsburgh, people pay twice as much under a property tax as under a land value tax, but they pay 3 times as much over their lifetimes under a wage tax as under a land value tax. And corporate property doesn't pay a wage tax. It's not as efficient as small business, so it doesn't generate as much business tax. It's less improved than small business. You look at that giant Home Depot, what is the building? It's just a shell. It's a shell with a bathroom in the back. And then maybe there's a small office somewhere, but there's nothing to it. Or you look at the small businesses, and they have lots of rooms and lots of, they have bathroom in a smaller complex. The building to land value is higher for the small business than it is for the Walmart or the Home Depot or the Bed Bath & Beyond or any of those. So basically, if you want to get corporation, one thing is that you go back to property tax or land value tax if you can. But property tax is still better. It's less regressive. No matter how you try to stack the income tax, it ends up being regressive. Because the people at the top, if the people at the top who have so much money that cash flow is not an issue to them anymore, they can say, we can invest in this factory and create jobs, but we're really near our managerial capacity, so I don't know how efficiently we can run this factory or this business or whatever. But we can buy up land, and the land is up in value, and we can just ignore the land and it'll go up in value. And there's no income tax on it. You can sit on this land for 100 years, and until you decide to sell it, if you ever decide to sell it, you don't generate income tax. So what happens to income tax is it moves, the big corporations, moves their behavior away from producing and toward buying up assets that will increase in value without generating any income tax, without creating any jobs, without producing any wealth, without doing anything that we tolerate we tolerate these corporations because they do that, because they provide jobs and they create wealth. And we have a tax system that only punishes them if they provide jobs and create wealth. If they grab up more land and resources, there's no income tax on that. So the bottom line is, if you want to test corporate efficiency, you test it by taxing the value of the land, and whoever does the most with the least land wins.
Any comments or questions from John?
So, if you have these big box stores and they're inefficient, so is Amazon then, because they're mail order and have all these employees there, are they more efficient than big box stores?
Amazon's working a separate scale. Back in the progressive era, Standard Oil got the railroads to charge other competitors more than they charged Standard Oil. So the railroad would haul your Standard oil for like $1 a barrel, and they charge $2 a barrel to hire somebody else's. And they even got Standard Oil even got a kickback from that. And as a result of that, we passed what's called restraint of trade laws. And a restraint of trade law says, like Walmart, if Walmart wants to get something from a supplier, Walmart cannot demand that that supplier charge other people more. Now, he can demand that they not charge other people less. They can say, you have to sell it to us as cheap as you sell it to anybody. But then Walmart is on their own for marking it up. Amazon makes people charge, they're not allowed to charge any more on Amazon than they charge on eBay or anything else. But Amazon's markup is buried in the price rather than put on the price. So if at one time eBay was making like 5% on, you would buy something through eBay and they would make 5% plus any credit card charges that went to PayPal or whatever. And Amazon's getting 15%. Now if I have something to sell and I want to get $100 out of it, I have to sell it for $115 on Amazon. But my Amazon contract does not let me sell it for $105 on eBay, even though I'm still getting $100 either way. So there's a loophole in the restraint of trade laws because Amazon is charging a higher markup, but the markup is in the price. And the law was written so that the law was written on the wholesale price. If Amazon was actually buying it from me and reselling it, I could say, look, I'll sell it to you for 100, I'll sell it to eBay for 100. If eBay can sell it for 105 and you have to sell it for 115, that's your problem. If I can put it on my own website and sell it for 100, that's your problem. But due to this loophole, Amazon has prevented anybody from undercutting them on price. Now, some people who are big enough can get around this. I can have John, if John has something to sell, he makes slippers, okay? And John has slippers to sell, and he sells them on Amazon for $25, and Amazon gets its 15%. I can sell the same slippers. He's a different company. So he can sell the slippers for $25 on Amazon, and then he can very quietly sell the slippers to me, and I can sell them for $22 on eBay. But it comes up as a different vendor and a different. So there's ways around it, but there's so few people who want to play that game. And then eBay, once they saw that they couldn't undercut Amazon anyhow, they raised their commission. So eBay is now like 12 or 13%. It's only slightly cheaper than Amazon. But yeah, Amazon gets over in restraint of trade, and then they also get over on the fact that everything is global to begin with. So if something is made in China and shipped to California, and then Amazon is going to ship it to you, it might be hard for you to compete with that by buying it from China directly and going through all that. But when we start taxing fuel consumption, it becomes much cheaper to make something in Columbus and ship it to Athens. Or to make something, in other words, most things, the big corporations are much more efficient in the production, but the distribution is more efficient if it's produced locally and shipped locally, especially with food, because food has to be, you really have to, that food that comes from California comes on airplanes and stuff. It's really hard to ship quality food across the country or from Chile. We get grapes from Chile and meat from Chile. It's really hard to ship that efficiently and compete with somebody who could do it locally, because the distribution charges are one of the things. Distribution should be, fuel consumption should be taxed for the same reason land should be taxed, because that fuel is only going to be here once, and if you burn it, your grandchildren can't burn it. And so there's no reason for us to be saying, let's just save, we have human beings who are not working. It doesn't make any sense to say, let's consume fuel and save money, and the heck with our grandchildren, whether they have fuel or not.